What is the Swiss Army knife rule, and how does it relate to computers and software? Well, the Swiss Army knife rule is the more functions something performs, the less effectively it performs each function. I used to carry this cool little Swiss Army knife, this little bitty thing. It had tweezers, and it had a toothpick, and had a nail file, and it had a knife blade. And it was a really cool thing to have in your pocket. And I traveled enough that TSA made that something that it wasn't worth carrying. And now I've moved on to where I'm an uber geek. Instead of just a nail file and a knife blade and a tweezers and a toothpick, I've got multi-tools that have all kind of neat stuff on them, screwdrivers and files and knife blades. And this is my favorite. It's like a little saw, like a little trimmer saw. And could I go out in my yard and use this little trimmer saw to trim up a shrub? Absolutely, I could do that. But if I'm going to trim shrubs all day, I'd probably pick a tool that looks more like this. Or, to use another example, one of the things that I love to do is cook a brisket. Here's a picture of one of the briskets I did recently. And the first thing, and probably the most important thing about cooking brisket, and if you're interested in briskets, I'll put a link, Matt Pittman, Meat Church down in Waxahachie, Texas. Great videos. I could trim a brisket with that knife, but the knife that I use to trim a brisket is substantially larger, and it does the job a lot better than this knife does. The same thing's true of software. One of the first pieces of software that fell victim to the Swiss Army knife rule was a piece of software called Zone Alarm. Zone Alarm was a lightweight, free firewall. What a firewall does is it keeps computers connecting to your computer, or your computer connecting to other computers without you knowing it. It kind of allows you to do some traffic management on your computer, because what we found out is that you'd download a piece of software and it would be adware or spyware, and it'd be sending information out of your computer and accepting connections from your computer, as before Windows had a firewall. And over time, Zone Alarm found out that, hey man, there were some antivirus vendors that were making a lot of money, and firewall was not something that people understood, and you could do adware and spyware and all kind of stuff. And Zone Alarm kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and adding more and more functionality. It became just a pig. It'd slow your computer down to where it was unusable, because Zone Alarm was doing all kind of stuff that it wasn't normally designed to do. That's how the Swiss Army knife rule does. You take something that's really good and really easy to use, like a pocket knife, and you put a bunch more stuff on it, like screwdriver. Yeah, I've got several different size screwdrivers on this tool. But if I'm going to drive screws all day, I want a screwdriver, not a tool that has that as one of its ancillary functions. And we're seeing that more and more with software still in terms of software protection. The antivirus vendors have expanded out. Instead of just doing antivirus, they do antivirus and malware and email filtering and firewall, and each of these things goes away from the core that they do really well. So when you pick a piece of software, think about the multi-tool. Think about the Swiss Army knife. If you're going to do something a lot with a piece of software, buy a piece of software for that thing. Like Microsoft Word used to be a great, simple word processing program. You type a letter, you change the font, you print it, you're good to go. Then they added mail merge functionality so that you could do form letters and put addresses in them so you didn't have to retype them. And then it became publishing, and it became something you could put tables of contents in and formatting things. And now Microsoft Word is really quite difficult to use because it's got so many different functionalities. So the Swiss Army knife rule works for Swiss Army knives and multi-tools the same way it does software. So if you hear of a piece of software, or you decide to buy a piece of software, be cautious of all the things that it promises to do for you, and balance the things that you really need for it to do versus the things that it wants to do. Because even if you buy a really good piece of software to do one thing that has other functionality, that other functionality is going to put code on your computer. It's going to slow your computer down and make your computer harder to use, just like a Swiss Army knife. So from a tech for the untechnical standpoint, before you buy a piece of software, look at it and decide what you really need for it to do. Make sure it does that really well. And then if you need another software to do something else, do that. Here's the last thing to bear in mind. If you have a lot of functionality that you sometimes use, it's a lot easier to carry a multi-tool, like my multi-tool here, that's got the ability to do screwdrivers and to do little saws and to do little knife blades and to have a pair of pliers and a pair of wire cutters. And yes, it's probably a lot easier if you want to carry a multi-tool in your pocket, because that's not so big. You can carry that on your belt if you're a nerd, and you've got that functionality so that you can do lots of things with that little thing that you carry around pretty easily. The difference is that on a computer, you have to load software. You have to load code. that piece of software that you load, that's like a Swiss Army knife, that's got a lot of different functionalities. All of those functionalities load when you load the software. So when you load Microsoft Office, or where you load Microsoft Excel or Microsoft Word or Norton Antivirus, if you primarily use it as a knife, for example, you carry all of that other stuff along with you. And all of that other stuff that carries along with the software creates a problem for your computer and processing speed and memory and RAM and all those other things. So while it might be a lot easier to carry a multi-tool than it is to carry a big screwdriver and a big saw and all these other things with you in case you need to use them, the same thing is true of a computer, because with the computer, it loads all of those big pieces of code into your computer for every functionality that that thing carries. So it's not like the physical world where I might want to be able to carry this on my belt to have a screwdriver and a little saw blade and a little file. But if you do that on your computer, it loads the computer up and it takes up a lot of memory and a lot of processing power. So again, before you decide to load something that does lots of things, decide which of those things you really need and maybe look at a piece of software that does what you need instead of what you might want to do. And it's not just software. It's also printers. One of the biggest problems we have is people who buy that all-in-one printer that scans and faxes and copies and does all these things. If your only thing you're going to do with printer is print documents, if you add all that other stuff, it's more stuff to break, it's more stuff to create complexity, and it's more stuff that makes it harder to update and use. So when you pick a piece of software or you pick a piece of computer hardware, decide what you want it to do. Make sure it does that thing extremely well, and be cautious of adding a bunch of functionality that you may or may not use. If you don't ever fax, don't have a fax machine software. Take a picture of something with your phone and send it to somebody. Don't spend the extra money. Don't slow your computer down. Swiss Army knife rule. Works for multi-tools, works for computers. I'm Woody Huffines. This is Tech for the Untechnical. If you like the content, hit the subscribe button, give me a thumbs up, a like, leave us a comment, share it with your friends, because we sure enjoy doing them. We'll see you again soon.